So it is 6 minutes after the hour, so I think we're going to get started because we only have till 45. Is that all right with you, Derek, or should I wait a couple minutes?
I think that works for me.
Okay,
Let's get started.
perfect. Perfect. Okay, so I'm going to ask one of my colleagues to help me with the document. Hi, everyone. My name is Heather Leson. You'll hear my accent. I am actually Canadian, but I live in Geneva, Switzerland. I work at the International Federation of the Red Cross Red Crescent Society, specifically in Solferino Academy, which is a think do tank that focuses on innovation, transformation, and leadership. I'm interested in how we can social learn and how we can use our best skills in a light way. And I'm a co-editor and founder of the Data Playbook, which we use, which we'll talk about today. And I'm just going to introduce my co-hosts who also were involved in the project. We'll talk a little bit about what we're doing. We'll do a couple of quick exercises, and then we have a Q&A just in terms of our format. So again, I'm Heather. Over to Sabrina.
I am Sabrina. I'm a Senior Advisor, Health and Digital Innovation for the Canadian Red Cross. I also work in lead digital data literacy within the Canadian Red Cross, and I've been collaborating and following Heather and Melissa in their endeavor of digital transformation and digital literacy. Thank you. Nice to meet you all.
Melissa?
Hi, everyone. So I'm Melissa. Similar to Heather, I'm also based in Europe, so it's a bit later in the evening for us here today. I am the data literacy and digital literacy expert as part of the International Federation for the Red Cross Red Crescent, but I also work for the Netherlands Red Cross under the same role. And I am also a co-editor and new product owner of the Data Playbook, in which we will be talking to you about today.
Yeah, thanks, Melissa, for taking that product from me so that I could work on other things. So today, we're going to talk about the Data Playbook, and I do have some resources for you, and I am going to share some slide links. I'm not going to spend very much time on slides because what we really want to do is have a chat. And as you can tell, we're fairly informal, and we want to look forward to doing that. So asking you some questions and maybe letting you know, because I think it's 1 p.m., so right after lunch, so it's nap time. So I put in a slide deck, which you can look at, and I might just share my screen very quickly on that so that I can walk you through what is the Data Playbook. So we started the Data Playbook because we felt that people, when they were talking about data, were only is it sharing my screen? No. It is?
Yes, but you need to just maximize.
Mm-hmm. Perfect. We started the Data Playbook because we felt that lots of people were talking about data and data skills, but what we really wanted to do was help teams do that a little bit better. We wanted teams to be able to use their skills and also that there was data training around the world. And so after a bunch of pilots and some workshops, we did a beta version, which we launched in 2018, continued to do some pilots, wrote a strategy, wrote some policies, including the data protection policy, and fast forward, we launched the v.1, the version 1 of the playbook. Now the playbook is 120 exercises, games, scenarios, and checklists across the whole data pipeline, from what is data and why does it matter, all the way up to what is emerging tech and what is data science. It was done by thousands of people around the world using these workshops. And then the the v.1 version we did during COVID times online with 270 contributors. And so just to say very quickly, there are 10 modules. And again, everything from how do you understand data to nurturing a data culture, to analyzing data and responsible data. So how do you talk about consent? How do you do this in a fun and light way, in a safe way? How do you present data? And so underneath each of these things, there's slide decks, checklists, scenarios, games, and all of those have been piloted around the world and tested by people and curated. So we created it for the Red Cross and by the Red Cross. We did have some partners join us, including some people from the Canadian Open Data community, as well as other communities around the world, come and join us and just have a couple of chats and gave some insights and some feedback. When we launched the playbook in 2018, we made it Creative Commons, and we did that because I'm a big fan of open data and open source, and I felt like that if we don't give it to people to let them remix it, then we're making a mistake. And so my donor felt the same way. And so we continue to make sure that our content's free and open for anybody to use. We were surprised that other humanitarians and development experts and governments actually have used the playbook. And that was a really big flattering moment because we actually created it for ourselves. Now the playbook itself, again, is something that you can do in 30 minutes to an hour. Each of the different things you can pick and choose what fits into it. You can think about what the recipe is or the formula that you want to use. But we designed this in kind of a 4-part. One, well, it's a collaborative kind of network-centric resource used for sharing skills. We actually use it to be able to find all those data players in our network. So think of it as a large-scale ecosystem map where we had people who worked in all kinds of different departments come and share what their data skills were and give back and Skillshare, and do that in a way that was much more productive rather than having what we used to have was a lot of consultants come in and tell us what data skills were. And we wanted to make sure that there was kind of resilience and skills within the network and kind of build that kind of organizational confidence and trust. So the method itself was actually the product. Well, we have this tool and we have this playbook that people are using. Our biggest win was all the people who were testing it and trying to figure out what works for them. And it's the space between where all those conversations happen. So instead of going through the product in more deep details, what I'll do is I'll drop some links. We have a bunch of videos. And we thought that would be better. And thanks, Miranda, for inviting us here. We felt that it would be better if we did 2 really quick exercises for you that you can do with your staff or within your departments or with your communities. And again, most of the stuff that we created does not require a lot of resources. It requires a couple of team members, a little bit of fun, and hopefully a little bit of spirit, right? And I think that there's enough stress in our work. And so we try to kind of bring a little bit of shine to it. And so we'll give you some fast pace. Sometimes these exercises, we do them much longer, but what we're going to do is kind of demonstrate what the playbook is, like how it potentially works. And then we'd expect you, if you were doing it, to maybe do a longer one. So we might not spend a lot of time on each exercise. You could actually spend an hour on each of these. But really we're going to kind of take it down to a bite size because we only have a little bit of time and we want to answer your questions. For Renee, it is being translated into Arabic courtesy of Melissa right now and some people with her, but we do have some other national societies who are hoping to get it into French. So it is going on GitHub, so it means that we hope that people will, translate it themselves. But in the meantime, we have been very lucky that Carto NG, which is an NGO in France, they've started to translate some of the stuff themselves because they want to use it. And that's the power of doing it in an open method, is that we just don't have the capacity to translate all this content. And so eventually my sense is that people will pick and choose and translate them into their own languages, but also potentially make their own scenarios and case studies or what have you to be able to do the work. So thanks for the question. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Melissa, and she's going to walk you through an exercise. And Melissa, I have my supplies ready.
Great. I also have my supply ready, and I'm sure Sabrina also has hers. Right. So as Heather mentioned, we want to try to keep this light, interactive and fun, especially after your lunch. And we wanted to kind of showcase how we use some of the exercises with really limited supplies, and just kind of a bit of creativity and interactivity and just a good fun spirit with different teams that want to learn about data. And so we're going to play a little exercise that's called Data in a Piece of Fruit. And it is aimed to show you how data can really be found everywhere, and you can have a different idea, a bit out of the box when you start thinking about data, so you don't always have numbers and big Excel sheets in your brain all the time. So you see my fruit. You also got a glimpse of Heather's fruit. Maybe some you've seen before, maybe some you haven't seen before. And I want you to write down in the chat, what data do you think one of these fruit items or even all of these fruit items could contain? And I'll just monitor the chat for 2 minutes, maybe a bit less, just to see what are some of the inputs that are coming in.
maybe let's just do apples first and then we'll go down the line because it'll get confusing because then your data sets will get, it's like sorting the data set wrong on Excel and you're screwed.
True. So what do you think an apple in terms of data would contain? All right, some answers coming in. Perfect. Real or fake is a very good question.
Oh, you had me muted. Oh, okay. So I was just saying for people in the room, should we just shout out? Because I know most people don't have computers here.
Do it. Do it.
Okay. So I put in DNA. Another one that came to mind is like fruits could tell time because of the age of the fruit. So
Okay.
that might be a that you could have. Any other data points?
Any others from the room that would like to share?
I like that this group of answers is far different from what I got from the East Asia Pacific Youth Network for the Red Cross Red Crescent. It's so different.
It varies per context for sure.
Totally.
All right, great. We'll pause at the data for the apple at the moment. Another question for you guys to kind of also put in the chat. If you were to think of a group of apples, so if you were to look at a bag of apples instead of looking at one individual piece of apple, would you be adding any other data points that weren't already mentioned by you or by others as well in the chat?
And our friends in the room, you're welcome to speak up, by the way.
Well, one of the things I was thinking about was now not only do you have apples, you have a bag. So you have a new data point in the sense that the bag is now there. So potentially information that's on the bag, information that's in the bag in terms of chemicals or material.
How much space it takes up, how much it weighs.
How many apples in the bag? Is there 6? Or like in Geneva, I get them in little bags of 6, whereas in Canada, you get like 15, 20, you know?
I have to say, they put, in the UK, they put everything in bags. Everything's packaged. In Canada, you can get things loose at the grocery store, but not in the UK. You can't get things loose in the UK. It's always in bags. Just a random aside.
So there's country differences in the types of data you get. Not a bad data point.
No, not at all. All right, so we just wrote down some of the notes from the room. So kind of the space in the bag versus out of bag, quantity, chemicals in it. Some others wrote numbers, weight, how they're packaged, average per apple, and the insecticides used. Yeah, feel free to continue writing any data points that might come to mind.
Organic
once we move on. Sorry, go ahead.
Organic or not organic?
Yep, also mentioned before, bio or not bio. Yeah, that also pertains per multiple items of fruit and not just one apple in itself. Sale price as well, yes. All right, as you continue to maybe put in some last thoughts, based on what has already been shared and based on what you can also view in the chat as data points, which are now our data set for apples. If you were to think of someone buying an apple or a bag of apples, what data points would you think would be most interesting for them to kind of view from those that were already shared? And if there are some others that weren't already mentioned, feel free to also mention them.
Price?
Yep.
Any of the data points with regards to food traceability?
Okay.
So where was it grown? Where was it packaged? How was it certified? What was the carbon emissions created in its production process? Any and all of those things are now contained in certain food traceability data sets.
Yep. And to answer Lee's question, yes, it's the data points that are most interesting for a person buying the fruit.
I mean, how many apples? I'm not really hungry right now. I just ate, but I usually get pretty hungry for apples, so number of apples will be important to me.
True. You might be buying it for the day. You might be buying it for the entire week. You might be buying it for an event or a conference. Or you might be buying in bulk. So those are also different data points that you might need to consider as someone purchasing the fruit. Yep, exactly. Buying based on purpose, as mentioned by Carol. Great. So if there's any other lingering data points that were not mentioned, also feel free to leave them in. But now I also want you to think, if I were someone, or if you were someone actually selling this apple or multiple apples, which of the different data points mentioned or not mentioned would also be interesting for that person to consider as a seller?
Well,
What Go ahead. Delivery, profit, cost, freshness,
Presentation.
presentation, yeah, demand. Yep, season also affects. If they are in season, if they're importing and also selling, then that's a whole nother data set that they're going to be considering in terms of what they're looking at for the apples themselves. How to collect payment, also a data point. Yeah, great data coming in, which is perfect. So now our data set is expanding and expanding based on the different purposes that we are kind of thinking of. And did you notice that once the context was a bit more clear in terms of if I was someone eating the apple or if I was someone selling the apple, that your data that interests you the most kind of shifted between what you originally put in as just general data points for the apple itself? Or did you think that a lot of the initial data items that you had listed were also relevant for those different contexts?
I think for me, I was actually surprised at how similar they were, which reminded me that there is no alignment of values around between the purchaser and the seller, because the purchaser wants good apples and the seller wants to provide good apples. So they're both invested in data related to getting good apples.
True. There are a lot of similarities. Of course, the customer is not going to be thinking necessarily about demand, maybe as much as the seller would be. But in terms of quality, freshness, if it's organic, if it's not, and quantity, it could be the same. Yeah, there's also a comment from Lee. As soon as you gave me an anchor, whatever I thought was valid kind of changed and narrowed down. And that's really kind of exactly the point of this exercise. We want to kind of showcase that one entity, even just looking at a fruit, can contain many different data points. And it's really a matter of what you actually need to collect. And so we start really thinking in reflection back to our work and the different projects and programs that we run. We need to consider data minimizations and really allocating a purpose for the different data points that we would need from communities, people affected, etc. and also that not all of the data items that we think we need will actually be important for the project. So again, another highlight on how much the purpose is really important to have when you're running a project. So if I started off this tiny exercise with giving you clear clarity on why I needed the apple, who needs the apple, how much of it do I need, then you would have given me very much of a shrunken version of the different data points that you all really mentioned, which are insanely great. And then a third point is that we need to really start thinking of minimizing our data collection efforts as much as we can, because we always think that we might need specific data for the future of a particular project, or yeah, just in general, thinking that we just need more and more data in case we need it for something else. But in reality, it's still being stored. There's a risk that someone might access this data, especially if it has personal identifiable information, and we need to kind of filter that in with their given projects. So this is just a quick, condensed, short version of this exercise, just to kind of give you a bit of a different scope, have you think about fruit, but then relate it back to, this also applies to different projects that we use in our work. So this is one of the exercises.
Yeah.
I'll mute myself at the moment, and then I'll give it back to Heather to introduce also the second exercise.
Thanks so much, Melissa. I use this to try and lower, I use this as an opening exercise for workshops. I use it around the world. And I think why we do that is, one, everyone gets snacks. No one's going to complain about getting snacks. If you have a room full of apples, not a problem, right? Or whatever your snack choice is. The second thing is that you also lower the barrier, as of course, in terms of project management, but you also lower the barrier for, hey, you just did data analysis. A lot of people don't realize they do analysis all the time. And so you hear data analysis and it's so formal. And we're like, no, let's just be real. So thanks, Dirk, for creating that. Now, we only have about 20 minutes left. So I'd like to hand it over to Sabrina, and she's going to run another quick, and again, we're doing these very fast. We could probably spend a lot more time on this and really play around, but over to Sabrina to give you another example on why we playbook over.
Yes, really quickly, and thank you, Melissa and Heather, and hello, everybody. I'm also speaking French, so sometimes my English may be a little bit mashed and mushed, but you should be able to understand. Just to leverage a little bit the About You table that you've been filling out during this session. Thank you very much. You can see that you've some of you have written, and if you didn't do so, you have the link and you can complete as you wish. You've been writing how you socialize and use data in your work, and that exercise is to leverage a little bit of that information. By being here in person in the room and virtually, we're building also as we go along, as Heather and Melissa have stated, a data community around the world, and that's really important. And it's important to know who we encounter and how we can reach out as well to one another. So I'll have 3 short questions for this little exercise, and those questions can be used as well if you are facilitating sessions and workshops internally within your organization, or also with external collaborators. What I'll do is I'll type the first question in the chat, and we will also use the chat and the in-person in the rooms. You can just voice in and comment. And again, the goal of this exercise is really for us to build a knowledge about who we are and how we can leverage and collaborate, even if we have distance. Virtual collaboration is always available. So what's important here is we want to know what skills do we have in that room related to data? So that question will be really helpful as well to map a little bit of who in the attendees right now and where we can go from here. So I'm all ears. You can type your answer in the chat and we'll be able to gather your answers for sure. And you can also voice them as we go along. So we read here, data governance. Data visualization, and one person may have many skills as well. You can type 1, 2, or 3 with a comma in between. That'd be perfect. I like I like the social artist. I paint people. So you are in your way making visualization with a different type of data. Storytelling. And as you know, as we deep dive in, the data world, depending what your references are, where your readings, where you meet and sit in conferences, they will have different name and also categories of concepts in terms of data skills and data competencies and personas. But here, I mean, we can use whatever language we want, and we can move forward on that. Data modeling. Bye, Rachel. And that, as you are still typing, because I know we are short on time, and I'm trying also to look at how you've been using data in your own work, and then we see that there's a correlation with some of your skills as well. We will add in here the second question. So the second question is also something that you can ask your audience if you're facilitating sessions or you're working with working groups within your organization or collaborating elsewhere. What's important too is to recognize the type of skills that we have, and sometimes we may not be able to name or relate it to a data concept. But we are using different types of data every day, and as you are moving on in your role and function, you may find yourself developing a certain skills that you had not realized that you had. So that's really important as well. So knowing that we are also on the road for most of the organization on digital transformation and wanting to embark on digital literacy journey, it's also important to look at what we have in terms of skills, but also where we want to go. So we call it upskilling, or being interested in having continuous learning for my professional development. So what we are asking as well in terms of a second question is, what skill would I want to learn about data? So I may be using mostly a couple of a bundle of skills in my work, would want to, but is there any skills that I would want to learn for my upskilling journey or my learning path? And that's important as well, to be able to identify some of the gaps that you may have or your organization may have, and then look for opportunities to fill in those gaps. Automated the boring stuff. There's a lot of manual interoperability in that world. We understand that as well. And when we look at where you are in your data skill journey, it's always good to be able to look at, what else would I want to learn, maybe in the same concept or developmental area, or in something different, completely different, that you may not see that you will use in the present, but probably in the near future it will come. More proficiency with languages. And that too, if you look at the skills that we have in the room, and you corroborate that with what skills you want to learn, that also is a little bit of a window to provide you with some information of maybe some of your peers that are here in this conference that have the skills that you would want to learn. So that also is an opportunity for collaboration on the large scale.
I know for me, one of the things I'm really eager to learn more about is data is talked about so much everywhere around me, and I wish I was better at actually. I don't know if I should admit this, being one of the founders of the Canadian Open Data Society, but I'm really bad with data, contrary to what it might seem. And so being able to understand data better, what I'm reading better, and then being able to do cool stuff with it, like turning into pretty pictures, and then being able to tell good stories around it. For someone who's around data all the time, I'm actually really bad at it. Just don't tell anyone. Everybody's sworn to secrecy.
This call is not being recorded. We're not taking notes. We're not naming names. You're in a safe space. No, I think a lot of us don't. We all have different skill sets, and I think the whole data skills is so wide range that you couldn't possibly have all the buckets. If you do, I don't know how your life's going, but that's a lot of different kind of data flavors. Sabrina?
Exactly. And then, you can qualify yourself as bad with data, but it's always to compare also, yes, within your line of work, but as we are part of this conference today, there's many level and range of use of data and capacity as well. And you may find yourself maybe better at some part of using data that you think, but it's also important, like you were saying, to identify the gaps that you want to fill in for sure. But just being part of this session and that conference for the last 2 days is already a good start. And the last question, not least, because I know we're short on time, since we've voiced some of the gaps and what upskilling we would want to journey we would want to embark on, we also want to make sure that this data community and that we're building an ecosystem of people that are wanting to learn, have skills, but also can share some of their skills and that are in the ability also to become teachers. So for sure, it's quite important. Sometimes we don't see ourselves as teachers, but we may have little sets of skills or understanding of certain knowledge that we can readily share just by a one-to-one virtual session or Q&A sessions as well around the world. So I'm encouraging you to add in the chat as well anything that you could share, or maybe you also have documentation or links that you can share within this group that we can leverage around the world as well.
Super. Well, thanks so much, Sabrina. I know we only have 6 minutes left, so I'm gonna step in very quickly because I want to give a chance for questions. So we do this skills you want to learn, skills you want to share. That actually became how we did the data playbook. We did that around the world, and then we got a base set of data, what people wanted. I turned people into a data set, and that became it. And we didn't want to hire people, so we basically wanted to use what skills we had and what skills we learned. And I think it's a really good way to build confidence. And so thanks, Sabrina, for walking us through very fast, a fast example. So we'll drop the links in again, Lee, I promise you. We just want to know, when you're thinking about data learning and how you're working, we've given you kind of 2 very high speed examples. And again, there's 120 in the whole guide that you can pick and choose. If you have resources that you think are useful for people for how do you help your teams get better with data, because ours is about conversations that teams can have, that exercises you can have, rather than kind of the single learner. But really want to encourage you to put those in the chat, and then maybe we can also drop in our contact information. I think Melissa is now in charge of the data playbook, so thanks, Melissa. If you want to have questions, she can certainly reach us. She's got an email address for that, and here's some of the links for it. But we have about 3 minutes if you want to ask some questions or give some reflections. Happy for that, and over to you. Yes, reach out to Melissa if you would like to hear a little bit more depth in terms of how we've done this. We also have a bunch of blog posts on the Sofrino blog about how we did it. And I added a link for how we put the playbook together. There's a slide deck that we put together just to explain the methodology, and the methodology report will come out in a little while. So, questions, comments, salutations, hunger?
I guess maybe a strange question, but where did you guys get some of your best ideas from? Where are you learning?
So I'm going to tell you by giving you an example from the playbook, because this has been 7 years of my life. My colleague Muno is an information officer in IFRC. He's super talented. And I said, Muno, how do you talk to people about data quality? And he said, well, when I was in Haiti, I was in a workshop, and I didn't know how to get my point across around data quality. So I picked up a box of Aquatabs. That's how you get bacteria out of water. Picked up a box of Aquatabs and asked them to distribute the aid. And I said, tell me again. So he gave everyone a box of supplies and said, distribute the aid. And basically it became an exercise in the playbook because of his just trying to solve a problem. And so a lot of the stuff in the playbook is me following around a bunch of people, and then my colleagues following around a bunch of people saying, how do you train that? How do you talk about that? What did you do in Abuja? How did that work in DRC? Or what happened in Jakarta? How did you talk about that? And then we also kind of tested out and played together a little bit. Some of it is just us trying to figure out a way to make things more accessible, because we found that a lot of the content out there was just way above our audience and actually wasn't very joyful to talk about. Like thanks, Melissa, who wants to spend 4 hours talking about quality? There's about 10 people in the IFRC who love talking about quality all the time, and everyone else is not in that room because they don't want to be there. I mean, I think there's a little bit more, but just to say, it's the people in the room. And again, most of the stuff we've gotten that's in the playbook has been done and created and piloted within the Red Cross by people. Some people came to workshops and said, I have this idea. Can you help me figure out how to make it into a game or a scenario? Or we went and hunted and gathered. So ask your people. There are so many smart people in your organizations who are just dying to do something a little bit different. Maybe don't die though.
I just had a question for you.
Hey, Lee, go ahead.
Well, perfect. So interesting how you got the data, but what sort of, I guess, assumption did you make about people's knowledge? Now, I understand a lot of stuff can be high concept, but when you're sort of digging into things, like for example, say you're talking about getting data off a data portal, right? Would you dive into like what is like a CSV, JSON, and all that stuff, or again, was that too distracting? Because I find sometimes you can confuse people by explaining too much. If that makes sense how I'm explaining it. Like, how did you decide exactly what would be the best piece of information that wouldn't overload people?
So we actually, I ran the first open data day at the Red Cross when I got there. And what I decided to do was with a couple of my colleagues, we called ourselves the Informal Data Working Group. Nothing like giving yourself a name to get some allies. But we actually had people demo. We had people demo HDX, which is the Humanitarian Data Exchange. We had people demo, this is how I use Microsoft Excel. And then we said, hi, okay, so now that we've demoed this, for the rest of the afternoon, we're going to do some hands-on exercises. Come and bring your questions. And we divided people up into groups to their levels and let them self-select. And so, I did that with Open Data Day when I was in Toronto, even before I joined the Red Cross. We did that kind of same methodology of show what it is, and then go into smaller groups and answer questions and solve problems with people. That's basically the formula we did. When it comes to getting into the CSV and downloading it, sometimes you just have to pull the plug and just show. And Melissa and I had an incredibly interesting, I can't remember, Serena, if you were there, where one of my dear colleagues, who's a data scientist, decided to show people what a Jupyter notebook was and to run through a data script and explain what it was. And there were a couple people in the room who were super unhappy because it was uncomfortable. And I said, well, we have to be uncomfortable. And then I said, okay, we'll pause for a second, Mahendra. Tell us what just happened. No, tell us in human. And so sometimes you have to show the hard stuff and then go and pause and then say, okay, well, what did that look like? Because if you don't expose people to the ideas, then you're never going to get there, right? But then you have to give them comfort, right? You got to put some safe kind of places around it. Maybe Melissa on that one.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that we took at least 2 months, if not 2 months and a half, to just dive into kind of the table of contents of what we wanted the V1 to be, with having these conversations of someone wanting to go very in-depth, in detail, but having to take a step back, because thinking about the masses, as the playbook was initially developed for the Red Cross, by the Red Cross, that the gap in knowledge is so wide that we needed to really take it back to the basics. And having these kind of comfortable but uncomfortable conversations when people are demoing what they would like to show in the playbook really brought light to the options that we selected. And of course, this isn't set in stone. We can always update and refine. But for the time being, this is what we came up with for the 10 modules.
Wonderful. Thanks for your questions. Thanks to Melissa and to Sabrina for the help and for the allyship, and Melissa for taking over the product. And just if you have more questions, please contact Melissa, and please kick the tires, use the playbook and see how you can figure it out. And we also encourage you to make your own playbook with your own team, because this is solving problems for us, but really looking forward to hearing back from you. Thanks again to the summit for inviting us, and have a good rest of your sessions, and good luck, Aaliyah.
Thank you all.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Heather.
Bye.